everyone. Thank you very much for giving some of your time to join us today. I'm absolutely delighted to be fronting another one of our series of webinars, this time aided by Pauline, with whom I hope to have a fascinating discussion about really the challenges at the depths of document control and design management. I have been involved, as indeed have all my colleagues, in trying to move us all forward, move the industry forward from this world of unmanaged, unstructured, difficult to extract information into this trusted, structured, fully audited world of information. Really, since I first got engaged in that, as Alison said, over 20 years ago, and it's been a passion to try and support our customers in their journeys to be able to benefit from that. Just in regards to who our customers are, I'm sure there will be some names that are familiar to you there, and as you can see, they range in particular from not just across a number of industries within the sector, but also we're very, very privileged to have what another of my colleagues would call a 360-degree view of the world, in that we work both for those who are delivering assets to clients and owner-operators, and also are very, very proud to have some of those owner-operators in those spaces, particularly in the spaces of water and retail, as our customers as well. And what that really gives us is an insight across the full life cycle of the needs of collaboration, information management, and ultimately moving towards this panacea of digital transformation mind. This very much is true both from a point of view and from a client. They're wanting to ultimately achieve the building of a new asset, or the fit out of an existing asset, and they're also, by taking on board such technology to help with that process, looking at being able to have a successful software project. But ultimately, both of those are about looking at what it is you want to achieve at the end, and then working backwards to what that means you'll actually need. And this is exemplified very, very well by this slide here, which I think simplifies the whole process, where we have an employer who has a set of requirements, both for the asset and also for information about that, and indeed about the project and what they need from that. And that feeds back through to a chain of delivery, beginning with a main contractor and then percolating down through to the supply chain. And then this is all about processing, updating, delivering that information back. And in that respect, we're all information managers involved in various different parts of this process here. And I think this very much is relevant to today's session. And we like to think of this very much as better information management, and I think exemplified by this picture here, which I think highlights that well indeed, and rightly so. An awful lot of digital transformation and an awful lot of these acronyms around client information requirements are focused on what is going to be delivered at the end. In fact, this isn't just about delivering the information that lives with the asset. There's an awful lot of information that's generated through the progression of a project as it goes through its different stages. And of course, as that asset information grows, you also have the supporting information that grows with it. This slide, again, these last two slides, very kindly provided by our colleagues at PCSG. We are all very familiar now with really, we have the asset information model, and in that some new things, new terminologies that are used at the project level to help deliver that across the EIRs, the BEPs, the MIDIPs, and so on. But really, what this picture is shouting out here is that this is about the structured management of information and communicating and delivering these information needs across the supply chain, whether that be delivering and focusing on the delivery of a final set of O&M information, or whether that's the ongoing updating of programs and capturing correspondence and so on. But the key point here is that rather than scrabbling together at the end to try and collate together all the information that will then be needed to be delivered across as an O&M deliverable, actually we've identified up front that this information is going to be required, and then on that basis, working backwards, we've communicated those specifically to the supply chain so that we know when we come to the end that we're going to have and be able to hand that information across. And that is good information control, and hopefully we'll pick up on that very specific topic later. And this is ultimately, as I said at the start, this is what we do. We are not just there to deal with the successful delivery of projects and programs, although we do that very, very well. We're also I think it's fair to say with some of our implementations at the forefront of managing that information at a client level who is receiving information from the supply chain once it's been thrown over the fence for client acceptance and part of the overall asset information record. And that is, again, I think exemplified very much by a slide I'm sure some of you will have seen either in previous presentations we gave or indeed in other communication by others. And this highlights the fact that really this isn't about having one single environment. We talk about a common data environment, but in fact there's already a recognition that there are, even though it sounds an oxymoron, there are multiple common data environments, but the most important thing here is about the controlled management of information, and really that beginning at home and then propagating its way all the way through into the delivery and then ongoing management of that information by the client. And therefore those red circles there show how we ourselves across that customer base that you saw sit really within all of those spaces, and we're very proud to do so. And coming back, I think, from hopefully what you'll see in the next 50 minutes, that gives us some really interesting capabilities to support both. But just this last picture here about that, really what we're talking about here is we all have a very focused set of information deliverables we have to deliver to the client. That's what we're measured on, that's what ultimately we get paid on, but there's a whole load of stuff that happens behind the scenes, and what we need is we need to make sure that we've got this ability in the middle to be able to make sure that there is that smooth information flow, and if we don't, ultimately we're going to lead to a failure in our ability to deliver. And there are lots and lots of reasons, as I've highlighted in a previous talk, on why we might fail in this respect. But really today is about that communication and those communication gaps. And just picking up on independent writings found from organizations who've been involved in this sector for a long, long time. Ultimately, good communication, I don't think any of us would question, is crucial to that project success. And that's about having the right information at the right time for the right people, and ultimately being able to go and know where to find that information and know that if there's an update that you should have, that you're going to be able to get it. And there are plenty of reports by major organizations such as KPMG, their annual report, very worth reading, I have to say, Turning Black Swans White, where they analysed across multiple projects the reasons for failure, and highlighted again the flow of information, the transparent information. If that flow of information, if that structure isn't there, and everyone is having to spend their time either working with the wrong information or trying to find information, then it is going to put the risk of catastrophic failure, project failure, right up at the top there. So as I said when I showed that picture about multiple CDEs, this really, and I think this is what I hope we all start to do as a result of this initiative from the government. This isn't about someone else doing information management. This isn't about it being well managed at the point it gets somewhere in the life cycle. This is about being able to do that from the very start, because if I am dealing with information in a consistent way, understanding naming convention, understanding how I can deliver to those client needs, which are propagated down from the main contractor, then it's just going to become a smooth process for me. And we're finding more and more now that we have smaller customers who are asking for their own management system as a result of becoming engaged in this process. And of course, that's necessary not just to make sure it's controlled, but also to have a record of what has been shared and when in this world of claims and so forth. All of which I'm sure will be picked up by our special guest. I think I would refer to Pauline today, who I will let introduce herself. But just to say, unlike the webinars we've had previously, we're going to take a slightly different format here. Historically, we have a lot of presentation, and then at the end of this, we ask you for Q&As. We're actually going to run this session with Pauline as a Q&A session, followed by some software. And so as a result of that, obviously, because we sit you around, we fully expect presentations from yourselves at the end, which we look forward to seeing. Pauline, first of all, thank you very much for joining us, and I think it says it all there. You have an absolutely dream career working for the GroupBC, but I think it's been a journey for you to get to us. So if you could just tell us a little bit of how you became to be at the position where you're talking to everyone today.
Hello everyone, yeah, thank you. I guess I should start by saying I stumbled into it. My first temp contract out of college was 6 weeks of microfilming hard copy manuals to be sent offshore. I spent the next couple of decades taking on a multitude of admin and IT roles, hoping to avoid ever doing dot control again. I've worked extensively in oil and gas, as you'll come to realise, but I've also worked in the finance industry too, and I'm getting to know the construction industry quite quickly in the last 18 months. Back in 2005, I left a senior IT support position within a large investment bank to start a very varied, fancy title, operations support specialist role back in oil and gas. It was to utilise all my previous experience, and unfortunately too late, I realised that included dot control. Fortunately, my department director had just purchased Business Collaborator and wanted me, as he put it, to liaise with the IT bods in getting it set up. You can imagine how delighted I was to find out how much dot control had actually changed. 11 years later, I decided I needed a change, and so up sticks and headed for the glam lifestyle that is GroupBC. Now I can help others get started with their dot management, and I can give help and advice on the admin side when it's needed. And that's what I'm hoping that we can do for you guys today.
Absolutely. And I think it's fair to say that we, one of the things that we recognize is that whether this is about delivering projects at a single level, or whether this is about helping a client in terms of trying to ultimately collate all their asset information together and better structure it, being able to have that invaluable guidance and experience from someone such as yourself who recognizes those business challenges there, I think is absolutely invaluable. And it's certainly not, I think if I lead to the next question, it's not just about throwing a piece of software at it, being very selfish. I wish it was, but equally, I don't think we would be able to achieve everything that we do without people such as yourselves. And I think picking therefore up onto this, it's worth now touching on that real challenge around ultimately how you make sure that those projects and indeed projects at both a construction level and a software level hit the ground running and get it right first time.
That's right. With the initial project that I was involved in when I made that change back to oil and gas, the project itself involves 2 construction sites, 8 contractor offices, as well as the various in-house departments as well, for the onshore side of things. The main objectives were to ensure that everyone, no matter where they were based, could access the same information at the same time, anytime. Oil and gas is a 24-hour business. We didn't want to allow external users to access our shared drives, so BC's cloud-based solution was perfect for us. It was a small project, but at any time there was up to 250 people that had access. Old school dot control, that would have been an awful lot of photocopying. We ensured that from the project's kick-off, that all our subsequent projects as well, from the tendering stage to the first kick-off meeting and beyond, everyone was aware of our protocols and understood what was expected. But of course, each stage of a project involves different people joining at various points, and so the engagement process is ongoing and more often than not needs to happen quickly. BC's interface was, and still is, simple to understand and navigate. This is pre-Quartz and even graphite when we started. And everyone from admins, dot controllers, engineers, and even senior management could find what they needed and contribute. Moreover, we could continue to tailor BC to meet the needs of new projects and the asset life stages as they evolved. So it's an ongoing process, but it takes a little bit of thought at the beginning to make sure that you've got the flexibility at the end.
So thanks, Pauline. So just to put that into a little bit of perspective for those of you in particular who are unfamiliar with BC, I'm going to now just support this with a little bit of a demonstration. What we see here is an interface, a gateway through into the data within the common data environment that many of our customers have chosen to adopt. And fundamentally here, we're dealing with managing access to information about projects, whether that be a single project or whether that be a program of projects. But one thing I would highlight here, and I think supporting what I said in my slides here, is we've recognized that ultimately that's starting with the end in mind. This isn't just about managing information at a project level. This is also very much about managing information that starts at a sense of space, that these are things which are being delivered into locations, be it somewhere globally or somewhere in the UK, and indeed then within those locations we have assets, and recognizing that rather than presenting everything the same as a set of folders that somehow people have to sort of map in their heads to what that means, we have reflected those concepts within our interface, and we've also in fact made it incredibly simple for those who in fact aren't really involved in a lot of projects and simply want to, for example, get direct access to say an asset itself, can click onto assets and can immediately get through into a world which is not a project-based world, but instead is an asset-based world, and can do slicing and dicing and searching of that. And when I go into the interface of Sainsbury's, we'll see a little bit more of that. And of course, we focused, Pauline said, trying to make it easy. Most of us these days, we do things via searching. And so, being able to just sort of type in, I happen to know that I'm dealing with a project to do with an Acme shopping centre, and I can see there, it is sitting there, the Acme shopping centre, and it's a retail project. It takes me straight there. It takes me into the space itself and then into the construction project. This is all about providing quick, easy, and I think what I would also do is highlight consistent access to project information. Now, we will be dipping into that a little bit more, but what I do want to show, because Pauline mentioned flexibility, and this is about getting slightly down into the depths of this, is where that flexibility arrives from. And our software is not a kind of a one-size-fits-all software. Of course, we provide it in a standard package where people can just take it configured in a particular way and go with that. But it's also very often the case that people will tweak and tailor that themselves. And that comes from working within projects. And here you can see that this isn't somewhere that software developers have to do. This is something that is through the system. You are able to set up different templates for how you're going to deal with information, depending on the complexity of need there. But it's not just about defining a structure, as in the words of our customer Sainsbury's, a sort of a set of shelves where that information goes. It's also around defining what it is you're going to store within there. And in the world of the document controller, in the world of that preparatory work, this is all about doing things such as defining the kinds of information that you're going to have within there, be that around the kinds of workflows that you're going to have, such as defects of work, contractors' quotations, but also around, for example, the actual type. If I just show all the type of information I might store in there, so the documents, the information then that gets stored against those documents. And we've tried to make it so that if you want, for example, to easily and quickly change the kind of information that you capture against that. So if I did, for example, want to capture, let's say, a level and location field against that, it is no harder than simply doing that, dragging and dropping where that information is going to be stored. And then I can even see through previewing it, applying and previewing where that information is going to be. Now, I'm showing you that because I'm going in here as a main contractor, and in fact I'm going to type in Doncaster, and I'm going to go into this location here, Doncaster, where we have some global operations. Because Doncaster is obviously a very important place in respect of that, and there's actually a flagship project. In fact, there's a second flagship project. Now, this of course would already have been set up, and indeed, so second flagship building, and we encourage the use, of course, of a show. This is the second flagship building. For Doncaster, and if I go into that asset and just simply add that, apologies, this is where control and the system comes into it. Of course, I need to apply that format. I said I'm now here. I'm now sitting within that asset, but more important, I'm now able to add a space for a project into here. Now, this could be a simple project collaboration space, and if I do SPC, and I can just then pick from a template, and you can see here I have a simple project template for demo, and I have a simple project for demo folders. Those relate exactly to what I had before. I do add project, and then that comes up, and it immediately shows me all of that predefined space. I haven't had to go in there. I haven't had to set up all that information. It really could not be more straightforward. Now, similarly, if I was to go into that new asset that we created, and if I add another project in there, and I say that this is a complex project collaboration, and CPC, and this time we pick from the simple template project for demo, and go in and do that, then this is in fact delivering something which is far more akin to the level 92. Indeed, this is our standard level 92 structure, level 92, sorry, BS 1192 structure that we set up to support level 2 projects. Now, if I flick back into here, very much doing a Blue Peter of one I prepared earlier, and look here at the ACME project, then the advantages of creating these structures, the advantage of having this defined information is that I can set up things in a very consistent way. So rather than people using free text, rather than people creating a mess of information, we can start to get that level of structure around it, be it whether or not I'm creating information that I'm expecting from individuals, and I will just highlight how I can do this here. So we have a concept of being able to add placeholders. In this particular case, I'm expecting to get some drawings, and I'm expecting to get those drawings from, say, an architect. So there's the architect there. If I didn't have that company because it was another supplier I was expecting information from, then of course I would type that in. I know that I'm expecting to get information for the second floor, and of course they are an architect. So, you know, these are the drawings for the second floor. And if we now click on next, then without anything, I have created automatically that structure. And in fact, it's recognized that there are already some what we call placeholders for that information in the system. So if I just create 3, then that is the data that has been provided. We do OK. Then here is the placeholder for the data that I'm expecting from the architect. Now, of course, that extends, and this is the beauty of having the flexibility of something. It's not the case, apologies, it's not the case that you always have to have information that is tagged in that way. Some information, it may be inappropriate or unnecessary to have the full-blown level 2 conventions, or the 1192 conventions. So in this particular case, I may also be expecting to get some correspondence from the architect. But here, this is just some simple correspondence. And if I do next in this particular case, we can see here that there's one of those has already been produced, so the next number to create is that. I only want one entry there. So I'm not forcing organizations to have to go through all of this structure of information. It is very much about choosing what is appropriate for the type of information and for the project. And I believe that will be very much the spirit that Pauline was talking about when it comes to sitting down with the project teams, deciding on those structures, deciding on the things, and then being able to ensure that in doing so that is successful. I hope I'm right. But obviously once you've done all that, clearly everyone just comes and gets on with it, and it's all fine, or I presume there's something you have to do.
Yes, and that is exactly how we tailored it. We had internal doc numbering and we had external doc numbering. So yes, you can certainly tailor that. As I said, we, as a minimum, would give out our protocols to everyone to make sure that the kickoff points and other points that they knew what was happening. I was also tasked with site visits to handhold new users and doc controllers. Just a minimum of training was given to most people. They were all given access to the online user guides instead and our hints and tips. And I think this is even more important now with BC being used within the construction industry, where the PAS 1192 is the structure behind all the communications, but not everyone might be well versed in its actual processes. The guidance made available by common rooms is a great way of giving people help and advice when they need it. And it reduces the need for arranging logistically challenging training sessions for, well, already busy people. And I think if you can show us the common rooms, that would be really helpful, Steve.
It's almost like you know what I'm going to be showing. Yeah, I think I'd like to take credit for what everyone is about to see here. I can take some of the credit for providing the capability for our customers to be able to do this great stuff, but this is very much about what our customers have chosen to do for them in what I would say is an exemplar of using this. But yes, this engagement is so important, and because we all know we have so much starting and leaving and so on that happens within projects, then being able to provide this thing which we now typically term a common room, that is in a sort of intranet view of the world that provides all of the clear guidance. For example, if I go in the case of Sainsbury's, who have embraced level 2 really from a commercial company point of view in a way that I think just has to be admired. You can see here that people want to know about the naming convention. You go through and there's documentation here about what you should do, reference sheets, and so on and so forth, which I think is absolutely admirable. There's also, of course, information, a great deal of information around training and helping and onboarding. If I click on training material, then this takes us through to a series of training videos which have been provided, which of course can act as refreshers, can act as people learning things the first time. Very much we try and get to a point where people are just able to use the system with as minimal effort as possible. And they've even gone one step further as well, which obviously they recognise that this is an ongoing program of education and ultimately setting up sessions, regular sessions that allow people to come in, showing places in the diaries where those are going to happen, and therefore being able to have those surgeries, ask those questions, and ultimately get the system to work for them. The more we can do to help onboard those through those common rooms, I think the better the outcome, and the more we can, as I said at the start, get it right first time. What we can also do, and the reason why I highlighted, of course, those placeholders, and if we look at the placeholders there for the architect, and if I go to my folder here, which apologies, recent folder example files, and go into the architect here, where we have, you can notice here, ICP ARC ZZ02 drawing 004, and so on, down through to 6. If I were to drag and drop this information here, well, you won't see it because I'm not necessarily showing my full screen. We've created an expectation, communication, if you will, to the architect of providing some information. And if I just drag and drop there, ultimately it can see that those placeholders are there waiting for that information. And so by structuring and saying, this is what I want you to provide, and giving you the names to use and so on, you can just go through, you can either just upload or upload and process and go through the whole thing and get it right first time. Now, I'm not going to go through into this in detail, because I think really what you'll be more interested in, and what I'm delighted to be able to show, is what one of our clients, again, Sainsbury's, has, by using good document control and by using the naming convention. They've really taken this to the nth degree, and I hope this shows, because it is fantastic. We work very hard with them on this, and I just skipped slightly forward, but this basically is Sainsbury's have been able to, through using the naming convention, they don't work on projects, they work on programs, and they work on programs that, of course, are distributed among the system in terms of the projects that are delivering into those programs, all of which relate to different stores. They have a need to be able to update, say, store plans en masse, and rather than having to go into each individual plan, each individual project, apologies, or each individual asset, they are now able simply to drag and drop content into a single location, which is very, very clearly shown on the front page here. And rather than that requiring administration on their part, it intelligently knows, because it's been named well, where that information is to go, and it allows them through file and process just to take that information through into the right place. So as you saw me there in the space that I was in with the green showing that I'd matched the correct 1192 types, this is matching those drawings that are there. It's automatically filled in a whole load of other information about the assets, about the programs, about the originators, because that was all in the name, and all is required then from the individuals is to type in that descriptive information that isn't in the file name, and they can not only submit those into the system, but they can then, as it says there on the other training video, they can then send that through a mass workflow of approval, which gets all of that information through at once, which I think is absolutely fantastic. And again, in a very simple and similar way, this idea of communicating out that information need in a way which is available to all. Some of you will have seen on webinars we've previously had our process plan tool. This is about, if I just skip slightly, this is about communicating out the fact that I have a business plan that needs to be produced. That business plan ultimately is going to sit there within the CDE, but rather than having to know the details of that, I can simply go through an interface that not only tells me that that thing is provided, but gives me all of the relevant information that's going to help me get that information at the quality that it should be right first time. And in fact, it's going to give me the templates that are going to allow me to provide that information. So all of this allows the user to be spoon-fed through the process. And skipping slightly forward to the end, if I then highlight it from the point of view that the information has been uploaded, then in fact they can, in a similar way, because we know what workflow has been defined as standard to be provided through there, they can in fact send that documentation straight through a workflow that's automatically configured there within the system by these fantastic administrators and document controllers such as Pauline, making sure that users need to learn as little as possible up front to be able to be engaged and use the system. So, Pauline, I think we're providing lots and lots of information, but obviously, keeping track of all of that can be quite a significant challenge, I'm sure.
Yes, certainly. I was just going to say, you've got documentation and data coming in from all angles by this point. And that's when the questions start. And as doc controllers who've probably joined us and information managers will know that that's when the people start asking where to find stuff, where if a document's arrived or not. Easy answer to that is if you've set up some saved searches to let users generate their own reports, then you'll reduce your interruptions, but you also ease their day as well. PMs, team members, as well as the doc controllers can track their deliverables and even check for response bottlenecks, which might be holding up your projects. Audit trails can help resolve queries of when docs were accessed and by whom, so that nobody, again, is left behind. And the reports can also give useful information when it comes to tracing when a comment or response was missed or perhaps led to a change that you hadn't expected. And I think it's the setting up of these saved searches, which might take a little bit of thought to begin with, but it can save so much time in the long run.
Absolutely. And indeed, the observant of you who have seen how we set up this system over here, if I go into the digital construction project, in fact, what we have is we have a register of information here where everything is created, but then we actually have a set of safe searches so that I can filter that quickly between what is WIP, what is suitable for shared, and so on. But these reports that Pauline was talking about, I've just set up a couple of these really to illustrate the point. If I don't have to ask someone, if I can just go in and I can find out what's been provided by clicking, for example, on this thing for fulfilled in the last month, and surprisingly enough, we can see there the information that's been fulfilled just now by the architects. Then it makes it far simpler for people to be able to deal with things in a self-serve capacity, and of course that frees up Pauline to just focus on of creating those useful tools so that everyone can do their job better. Similarly, I might just want to see what's been fulfilled by my company now, actually, because I've gone in here and I'm a member of the architect. That's the same. But if I was to go into that search as a main contractor, so if I just go in here and type in Acme, for example, which is where we know this is, go into the construction project, and go into the reporting section in here, then this is all completely contextual. So if I click on fulfilled by my company, there's nothing there because actually my main contractor company hasn't fulfilled that. So setting up these searches, as Pauline says, a little bit of work in advance, but then that leads to some really powerful capabilities. And of course, it isn't just about documents, it ties into workflows as well, which if we have time, we will see. But ultimately, this is about being able to roll that information up into what we all expect to see these days, which are highly visual dashboards. And this is just a view of how we do this here within the latest coming release of BC, where if I just walk through here while this is shown, I can not only see what I've got to do, issues is our terminology for workflows, but that's broken down. I can very quickly get to those things that are overdue, those things which I need to act on soon, but also I can see from a project manager point of view, I can see what others have got to do. I can chase them up. I can see whether people in my company are doing things. If I know that they happen to be away, then of course I can potentially do that on their behalf so that we can remove bottlenecks there and so on. So this is about transparency of information, all of which is only possible through setting up these kinds of structures for good document and information control. I'm sure that Pauline would agree. And that breaks down as well into being able to look here. We can see these workflows such as document approvals and snags, and I can break those down even further into by company how oops, apologies. I can break those down further into on those workflows, who is outstanding by given workflows, and so on and so forth. I think this question speaks volumes. So we've provided information, we've in documentation and so on, but people are still around sending lots of emails, having communication in email and so on and so forth. And I managed at the start the challenge that we have, and that creates. What really did you find in the projects that you did that you would recommend is the better approach there?
The better approach is definitely to ban all of those and keep everything in BC. Obviously, I'm going to say that, but it was also I'm not at this point, but I can give you war stories of when things do go out of sync. And if I can just explain briefly why. If you think of the day-to-day project life, you've got review cycles and decisions that need to be made, and that's when documents get issued. Old school transmittals, you can blame the postie for delays, but if it's online, there's no hiding. It also, because you have that audit trail, you can also keep track of, you've got more control. So there's no backdoor email copies that only a select few get to see, or working from out of date revisions because nobody told me there's a new one. Everyone on the same page, same time, same information. That was our objective at the beginning. It helps prevent wasting time, effort, and of course money. Just because someone's out of the loop or behind the times, this stops that excuse. You then come on to a lot of contracts will have bonus or penalty clauses against the project deadlines. At the moment, if you're using Dropbox, Excel, email, how can you prove or excuse where the praise or the blame should be? More importantly, though, When it comes to more serious legal requirements, you need to be able to access your data on demand and know it's your final answer. In oil and gas, for instance, unlike tax records, which only need to be kept something like 10 years, I think, data relating to an asset must be available from start of concept to abandonment, and for a period beyond in some cases. If at any time during the life of an asset something should go wrong, you need and might have to defend every decision made. Think about, and I try not to, Deepwater Horizon, Piper Alpha, or indeed the Grenfell inquiries. It's not just which cladding you chose, it's the who and the why too. We've used to have to keep and be able to produce hard copy wet signature drawings. Thankfully, digital forms of the same are now admissible. And I think that will help you if you can get everyone to, stop sending the backdoor stuff.
Absolutely, and even of course on that subject of the wet signatures, there are now opportunities in terms of electronic wet signatures, which of course we ourselves have also looked and integrated with. So I definitely agree that that's the way of the future. If we just now support again with software what you've explained there, if I go into project documentation. And I look, for example, at some of these drawings for the second floor, then of course, rather than having to do what I would historically have done with emailing these or maybe putting them somewhere and emailing a link and having all that and so on, we can set up these workflows, we can have them pre-described in advance. And of course, they can be myriad, they can be varied. And here we categorize our transmittal-based workflows and separate those. For example, we have sending things internally around for review, but also the processes of driving things through, saying they're approval now, they're appropriate now for check, review, and approve to become shared. In fact, if I just pick that to, in this case, shortcut the process, because I've set this up here just for the purposes of demo, and you can see here that it's just like sending an email. People are very tied to email, so we don't want to turn them off. But of course, it isn't appropriate to have to, from, CC, and so on. It needs to be for approval, for checking, for information, and so on. But we also can predefine who those roles and responsibilities can be. And I know, Pauline, that will be things that you have done historically. But being able to send to a main contractor with some notes, with some dates, when it has to be done, that is then related to that information, perhaps any referenced information, and the subject and the description of that, allows me to just have a level of structure and control over a process that typically is not particularly well managed. And as you say, to capture all this information in here. Similarly, if I've gone through that process, perhaps then someone else has some questions around that, then in exactly the same way, we're able to take that information, and instead of sending that information on a transmittal, we can add a form, and it might be that we've got a complex or perhaps a simpler request for information, and I might have a request for information that needs response. Maybe this has come from the supply chain. I'm asking the main contractor here, and I've got a question, and I'm seeking for info, and has this moved? And so, why has this column moved since the last update, and so on. And that's not in an email, that's in a system, that's going through a process, that's ultimately something which, from what you said before, if we now go back to those reports, in fact, if we go in as a main contractor into those reports, into the initial construction project, and we go into the reports that we've got here, and we look at all of the RFIs that have been created, then we can see here, why has this column moved since the last update? It's in fact been targeted at me, so I've got an ability to respond, and so on and so forth. And indeed, in a similar vein, just to show how this consistent approach to workflow and how far it can go, it may even be that when we're on site, we're finding out that there are challenges, and we need even to raise as a main contractor, I might raise an early warning notice, and I know that on BNB and BFK you very much did this. And this is the level of structured information that can be captured. But of course, because it's there, because it's got all that there, it's searchable, it's queryable, and ultimately it can be reported against. And I think we would all agree that that is where the value comes from. So, you know, finally, we've talked about start with the end in mind. We talk about it getting to this handover process. You know, thankfully, as you said, lever arch files at handover are over. But you know, what are you these days seeing the maturity of clients in terms of that asset information handover?
If I take it as comparing the first project that I've been talking about and the last one I worked on for that company, at the end of the construction and commissioning stages, we had to gather all the as-built, as everyone does, the information, and compile the O&M manuals ready for the operating and production teams. At that early stage, we still kept the fail-safe hard copies, and we had DVD electronic backups. I had to take delivery of and then find archive space for about 1,500 boxes filled with lever arch, and a cabinet space for 100 to 150 DVDs. Thankfully, the boxes were immediately moved off-site, but that cost money too. My final project, we no longer accepted hard copies. If those providing them wanted to keep them in their archives, that was fine by us, but we didn't need them. I was only asked to get one set of DVDs, or the manuals on DVD, and that was by our maintenance contractor. And that's because we needed to have that backup on board the asset, since communications offshore are not guaranteed, remember. All our data from draft to as-built and the revised as-built was available on BC. We didn't need it anywhere else. With perhaps some minimal metadata value changes, some of our system documentation was backfilled, but now with taxonomies, you can do that as the project develops. All the final data could be moved from project to operation, some spaces simply being renamed from project XYZ to asset XYZ. It's the beauty of that standard naming convention that we've been talking about and the metadata fields, as long as you think about it. The values stored can be changed project to project, store to store, or country to country even. Flexible when you need it to be, but standard when consistency is what you're aiming for. I've seen many of our clients since I've started at BC finding the same ease of transition from stage to stage and project to project. And I think that's where you'll find an awful lot of time saving and effort saving coming into it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. It's probably one of the most common messages that we are finding at the moment, not unsurprisingly given the space that we sit in, but there obviously is a very clear delineation between that asset handover information and that project information. And what we need to be able to do is we need to be able to get that sort of defined up front, ideally, so that we can then almost make it the delivery of the handover information is almost a consequence of our working, not something that we necessarily have to actually think about that much. And that's really, really straightforward, as you alluded to yourself. If I just go into the project documents, or indeed if I go into the shared documents, and if I just open up the filter here, you'll see that taxonomy that was being referred to around the different information that sits there within the structure belonging to the different sections of the O&M information. And if we do tag those placeholders in advance with the right O&M section that they're going to sit in, then when it comes to, even across multiple projects, being able to look at, well, what was that handover documentation? And in fact, being able to look at it in terms of what has been sent across, flagged for O&M and has gone through and has been accepted as the construction record by the client. That can then be as simple as clicking on a saved search for O&M handover documentation. And we can see here, it's only a very small example here, but that's a method statement there to do with the installation of some Velux windows. And if I look at the more information there, we can see sitting there, it sits in the operations and maintenance section, procedures, and that was something that was specified on that as a placeholder before that information was provided. So we have a capability of being able to deal with that at the simplest level of reaching into projects, and then through safe searching, pulling that out of projects, and indeed also being able to go into those projects and publish into what might be a more familiar structure for those dealing with O&M handover information. And finally, if we do look towards the future and we look at the shared documentation, and we open up, for example, this architectural and structural design of this asset, and I view it in our viewer, which we really haven't talked a great deal about 3D here today, which I have to say, based on the engagements that I have, that's not uncommon. If I click here on a window that in fact happens to be a Velux window, and if I go, well, actually, I do have documentation that I need to associate with that Velux window, but in fact I need to associate more than in fact just that single documentation. I need to be able to associate a whole load of documentation en masse. I can find those similar objects. I can say, well, actually, I'm interested in every single window that sits on level 2 and is of type IFC window. I can find and select the whole load of them, and then I can submit and associate that information in one fell swoop. If I go into the construction project, I know that I'm only going to do that if I've got documentation which has been shared, but there I have my instructions for the installation of the Velux window, and if I simply associate that documentation, and if I now open up one of those things there, then underneath our file associations, if I was to pull that, we can see there the documentation, and that exists alongside every single window here. So when that asset is handed over, as all of that information has been built up, we actually are able to deliver that full digital twin, which I think you'd agree is considerably better than a lever arch file.
Definitely.
So I think in those of you who are interested in finding out more over the next few webinars, I'm sure we'll talk about the interesting work. Apologies, I seem to have skipped through. There we are. We'll be talking more about our work in these forthcoming webinars. Notably, in fact, we won't be talking, our customers will be talking. Trevor, who spoke at the last webinar from Mackley, and indeed Sakti from the University of Cambridge, will be talking much more about this really exciting topic of linking this fantastically delivered and structured information to the geospatial information, both from a 2D mapping and also a 3D perspective, and how this can be connected to sensors and other information for managing performances. And I touched upon Sainsbury's. It's a really interesting system. For those of you who still stayed with us, thank you. We've slightly overrun, but there's a webinar I know will be absolutely brilliant. Mike's a great talker on building a digital estate, where Mike will talk about all the things we've done to build that exemplar, what we would call enterprise plus engagement and delivery of a client CDE, and not just about a technology, but really how that ties back to the fundamentals of how that's helping deliver structured business change that really is addressing those things being taught at the top level of the board strategy and initiatives. So that's our ThinkBIM summer conference in Leeds. Those of you who may even want to travel up to Leeds for that, I'm sure Duncan will be very welcoming, and of course Karen there from the Environment Agency, to whom Trevor from Mackley, they are talking also about an Environment Agency project. She she will be talking as well. So you know, we are all over the country at the moment, and virtually as well. And we look forward to hearing from you and seeing you soon. If there are any questions, we have slightly run over, but I'm sure we might have time for a couple. Alison, do we have any for myself or Pauline?
Well, there's one question here come through for Pauline. Pauline, what are the three to five most important things a lead project controller can do to support successful project delivery?
I would say make sure that everybody knows what's expected of them and give them an easy way to access help. A little bit of guidance to begin with, and also another way of doing it is to make sure that you've got what we call champion users that can pass on the knowledge if you need to. But I think the main thing is making sure that you've got the help in situ, and that everybody understands your protocols and your doc naming conventions. And then, of course, make sure that they stick to them.
Okay. Well, I think the other questions that we've got, we will come back to you directly because we have run out of time. So I would like to thank Stephen and Pauline today for their presentation.